Well, good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome back into the National Soccer Network and the Inside the Game podcast, where we talk everything about the game, not only about soccer, but also in regards to other aspects of sport. Jonathan Turner alongside Nathan Wangler, and you're listening and watching this on our Roku, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and more here on this 20th day of January. Nathan, man, how you doing?
Good. I'm recovering from the weekend, if you will. Still a little depressed. I watched the Rose Bowl yesterday, the 2023 Rose Bowl, on repeat just to make myself feel better. It was one of the greatest football games I've ever seen in my life. But I did a lot of that. I did a lot of just stuff to distract me, really. The majority of the remainder of Sunday. Saturday is just a day I would like to forget. It was a good day. I'm not going to say it was a bad day. I had a game I had to broadcast. I thought it was one of my better games of the year. I went over and had a chili dinner with my parents, and some other extended family came over, and there was a athletic event on that night that I don't really recall, but everybody was kind of huddled around the TV watching it, and one of the teams was blue, and everyone seemed really disappointed. I don't know. It's something like that. But yeah, so that sucked. And then I came home and just kind of rode out the rest of the weekend, just hanging out and honestly staying inside, because I think it's negative 25 wind chill out right now in Grand Rapids. It's we're in Antarctica where we are. So it's been eventful. Let me put it that way. I think that's the nicest, most PG way of putting it for our viewing and listening audience. It was an eventful weekend, specifically Saturday.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, as anyone who tunes in knows that, Nathan and I are from Michigan, obviously rooting on our Detroit Lions here on Saturday night, national TV. I'm kind of disappointed in the fact that it was on Fox. I want to start there. I not that I don't like Fox. I like Tom Brady. I'm just so used to seeing Fox on at like 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock that I almost feel like I want to hear Mike Tirico. I want to hear, maybe Joe Buck, ESPN. I don't know. I just something, even like Al Michaels, just because those are typically the people who do the games at night, right? And you don't typically see, Kevin and Tom Brady, doing their thing at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. So maybe that's my first gripe. We were talking about this a little bit in our kind of like our green room, so to speak, even though I have a green screen behind me. That's no pun intended. But we did talk about this a little bit. And, hey, I know people are upset. I know that Detroit fans are upset. And I would imagine probably all the people across the country who have now kind of fallen in love with Detroit and the way we play and the style of play that Dan Campbell has brought to this city. My thought process is this, and I know that me and you are probably going to differ on this, and that's okay, Nathan, because I don't look at it the same way that a lot of the other media pundits might look at it. At the end of the day, the Lions did not hit their ultimate goal of going to a Super Bowl. And, Dan Campbell mentioned it in his post-game press conference, on Saturday night. It's going to hurt. And, yeah, we want to be the ones hoisting a trophy on the last day of the season. And they didn't do that. And they very well could have, right? If you look at this season for what it was, this team, the way that they were playing, the way that things went, regardless of how they played, always seemed to go their way. Just always seemed to go their way. And when we lose games, there's a mentality that we're the same old Lions. And I know that the same old Lions in the sense of, we haven't won a Super Bowl. I know that still kind of, holds true. At the end of the day, this is not the same old Lions. It is not. And to come out and say that, to be fair, it infuriates me. It pisses me off. And it's not because the Lions made a mistake and screwed up. We watched them against Houston earlier this season where Goff threw 5 interceptions, and they still found a way to win a game. So we know that even when Goff isn't playing at his best, that there is still a fighting chance that this team can come away. There was a moment in that game where Jared Goff got nailed right in the chin, right? And after throwing a pick six, and in comes Teddy Bridgewater, the high school coach who was coaching high school football many weeks ago. He comes in. He actually has to throw a pass. He throws a completion and then hands the ball off, and then Jamal Williams runs a 61-yard touchdown, right? So anyone, I was in that mindset thinking like, oh, my gosh, this team is is done for if Jared Goff can't come back in. And we saw right there and then that it didn't matter. My issue is this, and I'll pass it back off to you here in a moment. And today we're going to talk about expectations, because I think that expectation, either whether that be a self-inflicted expectation or what the media or what your fan base is expecting, I think those are all things that need to be discussed. But our biggest issue was not Jared Goff. All right, that wasn't our biggest issue on Saturday. Our biggest issue wasn't the fact that our defense was depleted. Our biggest issue is that we were playing against a team on Saturday that had nothing to lose. They had nothing to lose. Last year, the Detroit Lions went into the playoffs with a mentality that they had nothing to lose. Right? They went in with this mentality. They had this chip on their shoulder that, they could play against anybody. It didn't matter what day of the week it was. Didn't matter what night, who you're playing. It didn't matter. They went in with this mentality. And I'm not saying they didn't have that mentality coming in, but I believe that Washington had that mentality way more this Saturday night than the Detroit Lions did. And I also argued, Nathan, that if the Lions had actually played the previous week, that they would have maybe done better, won a playoff game, and actually found themselves momentum-wise getting some more success. That's my thought process. I mean, and we were talking about this. What's going to have to change for next year? They're going to have to find a way to still play as physical without having catastrophic injuries. They're going to have to find a way to do that. I mean, we saw catastrophic injury after catastrophic injury after catastrophic. I mean, Robertson, he broke his arm in like 7 places on Saturday night in the first play of the game. Basically, it was like 2 minutes in. Yeah. So those are the things. I know you've got a lot to say about this, but I wanted to, at least start off by getting my part in. But go ahead, Nathan. I know you have a lot to say.
No, I hear what you're saying. It's funny because I saw you tweet that out almost immediately after the game when I was on X, and I see what you mean. And I kind of laughed about it because I'm just picturing you in the middle of this group of people just arguing your point that, guys, we're not the same as what we used to be. Well, the rest of everybody in that room and everybody else in Detroit media is taking the opportunity to freak out about it, as they should, though. I mean, that's their job, right? That's their job, is to draw interest from people and maybe not necessarily be doom or gloom, but be passionate, which is, again, what our fan base is. That's what the Detroit fan base is. Listen, you're not going to win in the biggest situations in the postseason, where it all comes down to 2 things, right? Defense and execution. That's what wins in the postseason. That's what wins you the Super Bowl. I know everybody wants to talk about Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs and what they've been able to do. Understand that you don't build a dynasty like that, and you don't go back and you win multiple championships without a dominant defense, number one, but without a team that is healthy going into the postseason. So there's part of me that there was almost kind of this inevitable nature to it. And it's the problem of those people that you mentioned a little bit earlier that were jumping on the bandwagon, really didn't see this coming. A lot of the games that we won towards the end of the regular season, again, hinged almost completely on Ben Johnson and this offense doing what they did. We had to win shootouts because we didn't have half of our defense in the game. Now, what you do to correct that issue next year, new training staff, new turf, I don't know what it is. I don't think people say you gotta,
I think
figure out a way to play. Right. Yeah. You have to figure out a way to play just as physically without getting hurt. Guys, this is football. It's not a matter of playing less physically or different way. Honestly, playing more physically in the game of football is what gets you not hurt, because it's a physics experiment, right? If I meet you with equal or opposite force, there's probably a good chance I'm not going to get hurt. Now, Amik Robertson, I saw that play. It was just a freak injury. I mean, it was just a bad angle, and that's how he got hurt. And a lot of this, and it's tough to accept because we want to put our finger on a reason why the Lions got bounced the way that they did. We're like, there has to be a reason. And I do think that there are more likely reasons outside of other than injuries, but the biggest reason is injuries. And it's tough for people to accept because again, we won a lot of games with this ragtag group of bad news bears that were on our defense. And I now that I've had a few days to clear my mind, and I'm happy that the show is on Monday, that we didn't have this show on Sunday morning, because it probably would have been a much different tone in this room. But now that I've had a little bit of time to think about it, maybe I owe Aaron Glenn an apology. Not that I said anything to him personally, but I certainly said some things about him privately. But, I said future Walmart employee Aaron Glenn. But here's the thing. He did everything he could. You know, the expression getting all the toothpaste out of the tube? That pretty much describes exactly what Aaron Glenn did to this defense in order just to get them to this point. And when you're going up against a QB like Jaden Daniels, who's as versatile as he is, not just with running the football, but with throwing the football and everything else. JT, we had a guy playing safety for our team, for the Detroit Lions, in a divisional round game that could have sent them to the NFC Championship. I've never heard his name before.
Yeah.
I don't know who this guy is. I have, and you know who I'm a sports nerd. I'm a football savant. I think he
was a rookie. It was like a second snap, or like the second play he's ever played.
Number 40.
Yeah, it's
in the secondary.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And again, I want to talk about this expectation thing here in a moment, because it's all about it's in every sport.
To your point, they're not the same Lions.
They're not. And again, I mean, the same old Lions, they wouldn't have even been. I mean, this is what I remember about the Lions growing up, and tell me if I'm wrong. We would watch a game and they'd be getting blown out, and then all of a sudden, the fourth quarter, what would they do? They'd come back and be within a score. Be within 3 points, and then somehow maybe even get a score to tie it up, and they had an extra point to kick, and then they would not make the extra point, right? It's like they could find every reason to not win a football game. Like that would be like that they would find these reasons to not win a football game. And now they're like, they're sometimes they're being gifted reasons. And the reason why I say they're not the same old Lions is I want to look back to a play. It was either Sunday Night Football or Monday Night Football many years ago, Green Bay Packers, and Aaron Rodgers throws a 70-yard Hail Mary. They lose it in the last seconds of the game. But if you go back to that, what happened leading up to that play, they had actually sacked Aaron Rodgers, and they were called for a face mask. Do you remember that? I think we all remember that, right? And they called the penalty, and then we got the whole thing going, and then sure enough, Aaron Rodgers, laser down, whatever, we screwed up, whatever. If you look at this play that happened on Saturday, a face mask was called that did not happen on Montgomery. That led to us scoring a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I know we're not the same old Lions, because even in the environment that we're currently in, the moments, the completion of a catch, that was all because of Megatron, right? And how he didn't finish the process back against Chicago, right? Like those types of things are what I can look back and say, it wasn't just like we were losing because we were playing bad. We were losing because the referees weren't on our team. I mean, there are so many factors that went into all that. And I don't see that anymore. So I want people who, and again, I'm going to get off this train here in a second, but if you start saying the same old Lions again, I'm going to start smacking people, well, obviously figuratively, but not because I'm not going to
running around smacking people everywhere.
There's actually a TikTok or a short where this guy's in his backyard and he starts just smacking everybody in the backyard. Cop, he's just smacking everybody. I'm going to start line up and let's just start smacking people, because it doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make sense. It's like, come on, man. The Lions had 16 players on injured reserve that were on their defense alone. On their defense alone. And again, that was going into the game on Saturday. They finished with 17 because Robinson legitimately broke his arm in 30 places. It looked terrible. So everyone take a deep breath. Dan Campbell is still there. We might lose some coordinators, but, you've got this team going on the right track. And yes, as much as I wanted a Super Bowl victory, we didn't get that, So, but I want to talk about expectations here for a second. Do you have another thought or?
Well, so I'll leave it with this. So I agree, because the expectation has changed, right? So that's why it's not the same old Lions, because there used to be an expectation that they wouldn't even get to that point. And I was even reflecting on this while watching the game. Do you remember the years where the Lions weren't featured in any commercials Typically, they wouldn't show Lions gear or Lions highlights or talk
they're
about the
like America's
Lions.
team right now, man. Like America
We would
the
be
Lions.
invisible, but now, yes, it's on every talk show. There's commercials of Lions fans. So the conversation around the team and in the organization and the ability to get there and win back, win an NFC title and be the number one seed, those were things that really at one point seemed unobtainable. I will say the fact that Jeff Daniels wanted to release that song and talk about breaking the curse before we even started a playoff game, I thought was a little ridiculous. Okay, the Chicago Cubs would never. I don't know where we thought that we got the idea that would be a good idea. There are some people out there that are a little superstitious when it comes to that stuff because we didn't break any curse as far as I'm concerned until we have a ring on our fingers. But Here's the thing that I'll say. And I'm going to toss a bone to the other side because I think playing devil's advocate is good. I think it's good for TV. I think it's good for this show. We're not the same old Lions in the fact that we're not in the conversation. No one cares. We're not going to get there. Somehow we're going to find a way to not even get to the postseason. But we are in one way, okay? The Lions will find a way to choke away their season at the end of the day. That's one way why they are the same old Lions. And here's the other thing. You
call what happened on Saturday a choke? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. And here's why. Right? Because I do think it was a winnable game. But here's the other thing. I think, and I know that Goff had a stinker. And to be honest with you, I don't think he's ever going to beat the allegations, JT. I think he's a haul of very good quarterback. I think he is a guy that works in a system, and that system can get him very far. But I think when it comes down to making the biggest plays in the biggest situations, missing a check down tight end, not throwing the route where it needs to be on certain plays, turning the football over, which, by the way, is the biggest no-no in football there is. Ball protection is everything. He's not beating the allegations. And so I just think we should stop with the whole chanting of the name thing. But on top of that, I'm just going to, me personally, JT, I think this game screamed two coordinators who were interviewing for head coaching jobs before this game. This looked like one of the most ill-prepared games coaching-wise that I've seen in my life. I mean, 3rd and 1, right? You have an opportunity to go down and score and extend the lead to 2 scores. You throw an interception on 3rd and 1. By the way, we talked about the running game and where that was. They were gashing Washington. They were one of the worst run defenses in the NFL this year. And
they started David Montgomery. We talked about that. I don't know why we started David Montgomery. Jahmyr Gibbs needs to be the starter. He
28 yards on 7 rushes is not that bad.
Yeah, but the first run of the game, first run of the game, he got manhandled and thrown back 5 yards. Right? We went 3 and out.
Barry Sanders did. Barry Sanders.
I'm just saying when you start your first drive, you go 3 and out. Right? That's what happened. 3 and out. And then what did we do defensively on that first drive? We stopped them on 4th and short.
Right. Well, here's the other thing, right? But like 12 men on the field, the biggest play of the season. The list, there were a list of plays in that game. I mean, the trick play on 1st and 10, when you're down 10 and you still have a lot of minutes left to go down and score and potentially make something happen. This to me screamed a coaching staff that was ill prepared. And listen, I know Dan Campbell has to take the blame on his shoulders as the head coach, and I respect the hell out of him because he is the most willing, I feel like, of any head coach that I've ever seen, willing to take the blame on his shoulders. And I love that for him because that's his role. That's what he's supposed to do in that situation. You don't blame coordinators. You don't blame players. You don't point the fingers. You take the blame on yourself. But I do think when he said that it was his fault, I'm not going to say it was completely his fault, but I felt, and not just felt, and I think there's a lot of other people that would echo this sentiment, they were not prepared for Washington. And you're right. They came in with a chip to win that game. And I think there was a blanket assumption, not necessarily from the coaching staff. I just don't think they were necessarily prepared or focused coming into this game. But there was an assumption really from Lions faithful. And it's funny because there were opposing fan bases and teams that said that, Lions fans need humbling. And I don't think that for the real fan. I think for the real fan who's been here through the bad, through all the BS, whether it be Joey Harrington, John Kitna, 0-16, all that stuff that we've had to go through, those people did not need humbling. But I do think there was a population of the fan base, the guy who's out there being the flag bearer, talking to the Packers sidelines and people like that, and people that jumped on the bandwagon are like, oh, this is my team now. Winning is not a guarantee in the sport of football. And there are only a handful of organizations who have been able to collect multiple Super Bowls, let alone one. There's 12 organizations who have never won a Super Bowl, right? So if you don't win in the here and now, tomorrow is not guaranteed. And I realize Brad Holmes knows how to build a team, and he's been able to draft better than really anybody else in the NFL, and Jahmyr Gibbs is a prime example of that. But you're losing Ben Johnson. If Ben Johnson goes to Chicago and he gets Caleb Williams and they start building that team around him, yeah. If Aaron Glenn goes and someone else in the division or someone else that we play every single year ends up getting him and he has weapons on his hands, I don't know. Who do you get to replace Ben Johnson? That's the thing that I keep thinking of is the way that we played this year, 3 of the 5 biggest blowouts of the year. People think you can just plug and play. So we can just go get whoever and plug them in there and we'll be fine. You know, we're winning football games. It's not how it works in the NFL. It's not how it works in college football. It's not how it works anywhere. I've seen that team behind me. I've seen them have top 5 recruiting classes and bad coaching staffs and win 7 games in a year and get blown out in the biggest games. So I don't buy this narrative that, oh, okay, we're winning games now. Okay, so we'll be right back next year. That's what we said last year, and then we get wiped off the planet by a rookie quarterback. I know the injuries. Okay, I know that there were reasons, legitimate reasons why we won this football game. But to those who are hopping on the bandwagon and maybe are a little bit new to football because you live in this state and you saw what was happening and you wanted to get involved, realize guaranteed success does not happen in the NFL. And so I think it's going to be on the front office. I think it's going to be on Brad Holmes. And again, I trust him to make the right choice and bring in the right people. Don't get me wrong, because he did this one time. He can do it again. And Dan Campbell's not going anywhere. And we still have a lot of weapons going into next season, specifically on the defensive end. But you got to stay healthy. And it's just scary because, like I said, I'm going to throw a bone to the other side. It does feel like the same old Lions because they found a way, even with 15 wins, even with a number 1 seed, even with a home divisional game against a rookie quarterback. And I know that you talked about and I even said he's going to be a top 5 quarterback for years to come because I agree with that. They found a way to choke their season away. And so that, in one way or another, means in one way, it is the same old Lions. So I'm again playing a little devil's advocate here just to keep the conversation.
I'm kicking him out. I'm just kidding. No, I mean everybody's the one thing I'll tell you, everyone's entitled to their opinion. Even though it's wrong, but everyone is entitled to their opinion. But let's talk about expectations. Okay, let's talk about this for a second, and this translates into all sports. And I'll talk to you about my second to last season at Birmingham Groves as a head coach. It's a season when we went into it, did not expect to have a great year, and the reason why we graduated. So when I got to Groves, my first year, we had a sophomore group of kids who were phenomenal. The year before, they were all freshmen. They come in. There was a really good sophomore class of kids, and they were really good, right? They can move the ball around. They played really, really well together. And so I knew that we were going to be good for a number of years. And, you know, in that my 4th year of coaching, those players had all graduated. So you're coming in, and you're now going, okay, well, the players that we had success with the years before, you know, they're gone now. So what does it even look like? So you're kind of like, okay, so if we can just be a 500 team, that would be great, right? You know, if we could stay middle of the table in the league, it's great. Win the league. All right, win the league. And I'm not saying as we got along during the season, I didn't feel like you know, that we weren't going to get there towards the end, right? You could start to see how they were training. You could see how they were playing in games and how they were competing and how we were winning games that we probably should have lost, how we were tying games that maybe we shouldn't. Previously, we would have lost, like things like that. You're seeing this kind of like manifestation of how they're playing, and you're like, okay, this is something special. And to put things in perspective, when I first got to Groves, the team that I took over, the year prior, they were like 1-14-2. Okay, so like they were not good. I come in, and the first year we go like 11-7-3 or 7-4. So went from winning only 1 game to winning, to 11 in year 2, right? A year in 1 of my role there. We didn't win a league title. It went the next year. We won a league championship then in my third year. So we went to the blue. And then in my third season, we went we finished second in the league in the white, right? So we went up from the blue to the white, finished in second. And then in my fourth season, we finished first in the white, which allowed us to, be promoted to the red. And just so everybody has an idea, you've been covering enough soccer on our platform to know that the OAA Red in Michigan is the premier, like we talk about high school soccer, OAA Red is the premier league in the state. And I would argue probably maybe even in the country when it comes to high school soccer, because every season over the last 3 years, both in boys and girls soccer in the OAA Red, a state champion has emerged in Division I. So just to put things in perspective. So in that year, we finish in first in the OAA White, get promoted. And so the expectation is, and in high school soccer, for those of you that don't know, I'm not sure if it's like this in every state in the country, but in Michigan, everyone goes to the playoffs. So there's not like congratulations. And there wasn't quite seeding yet at this point, right? So you weren't being seeded. So now there is some seeding that takes place in high school soccer. So you had a random draw, and then you would go play. And our first game, we had a chance to go play against a really, subpar opponent, and we ended up, clobbering them. We ended up immersing them, whatever it was. And that led us up to another matchup, our district semifinal game against Berkeley. And Berkeley had always had our number. Like the year before, we actually lost in the opening round of districts in double overtime with 13 seconds to go in the game, and they scored a goal to win it. We were actually winning 1-0 with under 30 seconds to go in regulation, and they scored a goal. So we did not do well in the closing moments of both the end of that game and in the second overtime. So we lost last second. And it was like one of those things that just, takes it right out of you, right? So we're playing Berkeley, and you're going in this. You win the league title, right? You have this expectation now that you should go out there and beat this team. And, of course, we did not. We lost. And, then the next year, right, what do? We move up. And expectations are, if you're a fan or if you're kind of like someone who's from the outside looking in, you're going a brand new team into this new league, you're expecting that you're going to get clobbered. You're expecting that you're going to get your butt kicked. Why? Because we're a brand new team. We just lost. We graduated players, and we're now in the toughest league in the state. And what did we do? We got clobbered. we got clobbered. And so, and again, rightfully so. You're playing in the toughest division in the toughest league, and so expectations are everything. They're everything especially when you talk about internally. Right, internally.
Yes. Yep.
You start talking about, and I don't know, and I'm not going to speak to what I know about the Lions because I'm not going to get into that right now. We've already talked about that.
Yep.
We know the expectations. But for me, with our coaching staff, internally, we did not believe in my fourth year that we were going to win a league title. That was not something in my brain. It was, let's get to 500. Let's be a 500 team this season.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do that. We superseded that. And again, based on talent. How many times do we look at a team like Team USA, for example, in soccer and say, okay, well, this team, they're going into the Gold Cup. They should win it, right? They're the favorites to win. They have this, and this, and they're going to beat everybody. Then they lose that first game, or they tie that first game. Hey, you're going to go into the World Cup, right? That group, the group you're looking at, right? That group looks really different. The group of death. They should not. You got to finish top 2. Get out of that group. You don't do that.
Right.
Got to qualify. How do you qualify, right? Oh, what happened to Team USA a number of years ago? They didn't even qualify for the World Cup. They failed to meet expectations.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to have this conversation because expectations, everybody, are everything. They're everything to the team. They're everything to the media. They're everything to the ownership. They're everything to the fan base. They're everything. And when you don't meet expectations, you revert back to calling them a team that they've always been or been known for. Same old this.
Yep.
Used to seeing that. They're chokers. Remember Greg Norman back in golf back in the day? That guy would be leading a tournament by 30 strokes and somehow find a way to choke it on last day and lose.
Mm-hmm.
Like the master choker of golf was Greg Norman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He would you it's again you and I think even like Johnson too, isn't like is it Luke Johnson? I'm not a big golf follower as much as I would, but there's a Johnson who would also be kind of in the running on the last day of the tournament, and he would find a way to lose it. He would be up by 4 or 5 strokes and still find a way to lose it. You know, Tiger Woods would show up on Sundays wearing a red shirt. Not this is not set up on purpose, by the way. I am wearing my red
MSN shirt
pullover, but he's wearing his red polo shirt on Sundays. That's his way of this is Championship Sunday, and I am going to go out and win. Always known for wearing red on Championship Sunday. Go out there and win. Mm-hmm. Expectations. You know, again, we and I'm going to let you get in here in a second, Nathan, because I've been talking for like 12 seconds, maybe a little bit longer than 12 seconds, but, you know, it's just like you have this mentality, and again, the coaching staff could also admit this too, right? Because again, if you're sitting there, of course, coaches don't want to like let the team think that they're not going to go out there and win, but let's be honest. I don't think there's a coach on God's green earth that isn't sitting in their room looking at their roster, thinking of X's and O's, who isn't going to go, yeah, that's a tough one. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I can't imagine that there aren't coaches who are looking at their roster, looking at what they're able to do and going, oh boy, we are not going to be good. We're not going to be good.
Well, isn't that right? Isn't that the kind of the focus of a head coach, though, is to temper those expectations? Because I look at it this way. I realize expectations are everything. And I think you can tie this in closely with goal setting too, because I think that's something that's extremely important. And to a lot of coaches that I know, you know, they always talk about how things like culture are a constant conversation. You know, that's not just a one-time thing. You don't just meet up in the preseason. You're like, what's our goals for this year? Oh, okay. Well, we want to go out and we want to win the OAA Red, or we want to, you know, go on to get to a state championship or win a state championship. Obviously you have those goals, but it has to be a conversation throughout the course of the season. You can't just have it once in the morning and be like, hey, you know, this is what, or once in the morning to begin the season, and then just kind of leave it at that, right? Culture and expectations has to be a constant conversation inside that locker room. And here's one thing that I'll say: the coaches that are really good at making sure to temper those expectations and get rid of outside noise are typically the ones who are most successful. But it's the hardest, most difficult thing to balance sometimes, because when you have a group of kids who are hearing these things, who have this outside pressure, because where expectations comes in is really the fans, and the organization sets the expectations. And so as an organization, if you can set the expectation that you're going to win and you're going to get to that point, then fans are going to start to build on him, right? And there's this whole thing in sports that we talk about called the bandwagon, right? And literally in life, if there was a bandwagon, you could jump on and it would take you somewhere. Well, you know, talking about sports wise, the bandwagon is when a team starts doing well, everybody jumps on the train, right? Everybody's repping new gear. Everybody's getting new hats. Everybody, you know, people I know that have never been to a Lions game in their life, but they happen to have the means to go. And I know we already talked about them, but I'm just saying in general, you know, people will go out of their way to jump on the bandwagon. So expectations comes from the outside in. Rarely do I think expectations is from inside out. Now, how you play, that will breed expectations. And I think the best coaching staffs are really good at tempering that. And so the hard thing is, expectations, again, like I said, can be tied into what your goals are. I don't think it's bad to have expectations. And if anything, I think falling short of expectations, a push can be a shove a lot of times. And it really doesn't matter what sport you're in. If you fall short of what those expectations are, that can help you reset maybe what new expectations are or new goals, depending on what happens in certain situations. So the most important thing when we talk about expectations is fans and people on the outside are always going to have a list of expectations, right? Next year's our year. This year's our year. It's going to happen now. It's going to, that's always going to happen. Where it makes a difference is how do you handle that on the inside. And again, I think about the list of great coaches that I've always seen or heard of, and it was always this mentality. And I don't know if you ever tried to approach it this way. I'm sure you did, because you're a good coach, but it's always us versus the world, right? If I can convince my room of players that no one else outside of this room genuinely believes that they have any chance of doing what it is we want to do, then that's good. Then I'm in the right spot. Then I'm doing the right stuff. And again, culture ties in this and everything else, but expectations aren't a bad thing, because I think expectations, me personally, I think it pushes you. I think once the expectations have changed, you no longer have a choice that to be a 500 team. You no longer have an option to be a team that doesn't succeed or get to the end of the line, right? Like, I think about one team in high school soccer that we covered this year is Rochester Adams in the OAA Red. Their men's side, with how many talented players they got back from the academies. Obviously what Josh Hickey's been able to accomplish on the coaching side, whether it be the men's side or the women's side, what he's won there. The expectation for that team was pretty simple, as we watched and called them all year. They're going to go win a state championship, right? And I know that we picked our state champions and we went through the list and everything, but you and I were always on the same page about this, right? That should happen. But the thing is that's a hard thing to do sometimes. Number one, when you have a stacked roster that's talented, but number two, when you have that expectation on your shoulders that you should, beyond any doubt, go out and win that state championship game. So that's why I would think it was really impressive that Adams actually did that. They actually ran right through and won the state championship. They didn't skip a beat, because that normally doesn't happen. So sometimes you'll see controversy or some sort of something along the way that makes you go, but they executed on it. And I think it was because Adams did an outstanding job of managing what the expectations were on the inside. And I also just think that team knew how to play together at the same exact time. But like I said, expectations themselves, I don't think are necessarily a horrible thing. How do you manage those expectations? That's exactly where the difference is made at the end of the day.
No, and I agree. And if we talk about that and kind of peel back a layer of managing the expectations, is that there is a level of internal expectations that every team tries to develop at the beginning of a season. They come in the form of goals. There is personal, and then obviously there are team goals. And I would imagine you get to the professional ranks, every team is talking about winning a league title, winning the Super Bowl, winning the MLS Cup, winning the NBA championship, right? They're having, because again, you get to that level. To be fair, the separation between a champion and a non-champion, it's not as significant as you might think. It's not. I mean, look at the games yesterday. If we look at the games that happened in the NFL yesterday, the Eagles and the Rams, right? I would argue, had it not snowed, the Rams probably would have won that game. The weather played a huge factor in that game. You can argue about it all day long, but it did. I mean, you're talking about players that are fumbling the ball. I mean, like Matt Stafford fumbled one. I mean, there were 2 turnovers in that game that, like, legitimately almost, killed the whole thing. But they still found a way to get back, and almost they were again fourth. It was 4th down, and they had a chance to try to tie the game up and go ahead. So again, separation. Right? I mean, we've seen the Bills-Chiefs play in an AFC Championship game, I don't know, like 17 times now, it feels like, over the last 12 seasons. And, Josh Allen is, I would argue, I'm saying he's not as good as Patrick Mahomes, but phenomenal quarterback. Leading the Buffalo Bills. They have been relevant now for the last 10 years, give or take, maybe half decade. And they have just been so good, but they just can't get that monkey off their back, which is the Chiefs. They just can't get past the Chiefs. So expectations are a lot of things. Peter Zuick says that is why the Cubs fans every year is our year. Expectations don't end up to them. Hence why they are called the lovable losers. I get that.
So they won in 2016.
I mean, I remember.
But you know what the Cubs didn't do? Cubs didn't talk about breaking the curse before the first playoff series started.
But that wasn't the Cubs. That
I'll
was
drop
some
my pen
fan.
on that one.
That's Jeff
Lions want
Daniels.
to run all these promos talking about how they're the best team, and I've been watching football my whole life, and I never thought this would happen. Now we're the best team, and Jeff Daniels is releasing this song before the playoffs even start.
Well, but I don't. That's not Detroit. That's a fan. I wouldn't put that in the Lions. That's a fan. I mean, and if we go back even further for a moment, it was Peyton Manning along with Jeff Daniels sitting in, Ford Field with the bathtub, trying to do the whole so that whole thing when they were trying to break the curse of Bobby Lane, inside of Ford Field, that was an hilarious skit, by the way.
It was.
So I'm not gonna.
The song drives me nuts.
And totally. But again, I don't put that on. I mean, it's on Jeff Daniels, but it's not on the Lions. We say this a lot. When I look at it from the standpoint of even when I was a referee, what do you do before a game? Before a game as a referee, I'd walk up to my crew and we would set the tone. All right, here's what we're going to do today. Here's what we're if we know the teams, we know who they were. Right? We'd be talking about, hey, who are we looking out for? What are we talking about as far as players? If you're the coach, right, the expectations, the game plan, right? What does the game plan look like? Everybody is talking about expectations, talking about how to execute, right? And at the end of the day, does it always work out? I mean, football more than any other sport is about execution because every single play is designed a certain way. Every receiver, every player on that team has a role, which is different than that of soccer. Because even if I'm telling you that you're an outside back or right back in my system, that the ball, where the ball might go and where you might end up, you might end up being a center back. You might end up being a midfielder. You might end up being a forward.
Right.
But, in football, if you want to go from a lineman to a receiver, you have to literally go in and say, and check in and say, I'm going to be eligible for a receiver. You have to literally acknowledge it. Right? So everything about football is about design and execution. You're designing it and you're executing it. And I don't know I don't know specifically like how many plays in the NFL are the way they're designed and the way they're converted, what that looks like. Because, I'm sure at the end of the day, no matter how you draw a play up, that play that Jared Goff had where he's stumbling and almost fumbling the ball and with the Chicago Bears and everyone's kind of making these things, is that exactly how that play was drawn up? To a T? Probably not, right? Because he probably didn't stumble the right way or didn't, there's things there that probably weren't necessarily within the design. The throw, he almost overthrew him. Right? So I look at that. Look at that play with Laporta on Saturday. I mean, that diving play. I mean, a broken play, right? There wasn't pressure coming in. And what does Goff do? He's under pressure and throws a ball that was way wide of its target. And somehow Laporta makes a diving catch. So football is one of those sports where, now you start getting into set pieces in soccer. That's by design. Right? 4-man wall. You're going to have two players standing over the ball. One player is designed for deception. The other player is going to be the one taking the kick. And the deception can come in a lot of different ways. The way you set the ball, we would do different things. I'd put players on the wall in order to create some chaos. We would put players in certain areas in order and make them make runs to draw a defender. There were things that we would do deceptively on corner kicks in order to create open space, which would in turn allow a player to run onto it and go get a ball by design. So, setting, you could call it setting expectations, or if you want to call it, again, managing the game, all of those things will lead, to an outcome. And if we go back for a second, again, to what happened on Saturday, the expectations were extremely high, just like they are if you were the number one ranked team in the world in soccer. If you're Argentina, if you're Brazil, right? If you're, again, Germany, Portugal, right? You start talking about the number one ranked teams around the world in soccer. When the World Cup comes around, what's the expectation? It's to win the whole damn thing. And if the United States of America in men's soccer, not women's soccer, but if we talk about women's soccer for a second, they've been the number one team or have been in that conversation as the number one team since 1995.
Right. And now the conversation changed.
Yeah, and they've won it. Right? So when they won it, back in 1999. Now the thing is, okay, we want to go win it again. Now, it's not about just winning the World Cup. It's about winning the Olympics.
Yeah.
What's the expectation?
Yeah.
Got to go win the whole damn thing. And every coach and every player walking into that environment knows what is at stake. And I don't know if it's about tempering expectations at that level when you've already won the damn thing. Now it's not about tempering them. Now it's about I wouldn't even say managing them. Now it's about delivery.
Meeting them. Yeah.
Delivery, right? Getting them. Because, again, Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs have won the Super Bowl 2 consecutive years. They're looking to go for a three-peat. Right. Do you really think in that locker room those players are going, if we don't get it, who cares? There's no way. There's no way. I mean, they're thinking about giving, Andy Reid another cheeseburger.
Right.
I mean, there are so many things that these guys are trying to do to deliver that, to get there again. And every player walking into that organization knows that. Just like with the Patriots, every player walking into the New England Patriots knew coming in that if you wanted to be on this team, you were going to have to be selfless, right? And you were going to have to go out there and do whatever you had to do and get the job done. And that's how they won championships. And they did it with players that nobody knew. Like you said, hey, John, who was that player on the safety, number 40? Who was that? I've never heard that guy before. How many players for the Patriots were no-namers when they first started, and now they're big-time names because they somehow found a way as the 9th pick of the draft or a walk-on or whatever you want to call it, tryouts like the Philadelphia Eagles, found a way to make it happen. So expectations for teams that have been there before, I would imagine, are probably the hardest ones to deal with. Because as someone that walked into Athens as a freshman, I knew what was expected of me. I knew that we were trying to fight for a state championship. I knew it. It was right there. There's banners on the wall hanging right there. And if you weren't fighting for that every year and you weren't in that mentality, you were go ahead.
Expectations change. I like it's talking about, the flag behind me, now the expectation is you want to come play here. Okay. Well, we go win national championships. That's how it is. That's what it is. And so for the Lions and for other teams, again, we were talking about this in general, expectations change as you go, and they're not bad because I think expectations applies pressure. And I think pressure, when you talk about putting athletes in a position to get the most out of them, pressure is what you need. Because if you can't respond to pressure and if you can't be comfortable being uncomfortable, you're not really going to get anywhere anyways. But it's funny because we're talking about this kind of comparison between soccer and football. And again, this is me kind of dipping into two worlds here. But when you have a star player on the other team, and now I'm thinking about soccer in particular, I would imagine as a coach, you're going to do everything you can, not to just game plan around that individual, but do your best to keep the ball away from that individual or keep the ball away from them in bad spots. Because that as soon as they have the opportunity, right, as soon as that team has possession, they have an opportunity to hurt you. And so when we talk about strategy, right, there are different ways of winning games. Some of them are ugly. Some of them are really clean and cute. The Lions, I think, got to this expectation during the regular season of they got used to winning games flashy, cool. I mean, we got 300-pound linemen catching touchdowns. We got triple reverse over the top. We got shovel passes. We got everything that we needed to just straight dominate teams was happening. And I imagine it's like a really dominant soccer team that's got a bunch of weapons. And now all of a sudden, imagine half of those weapons go down to injury, and now you're working in kids that have never played, or maybe this is their first time seeing the field. Oh, by the way, it happens to be in the biggest game of the year. But you have this one thing that you do really well, strategy-wise. It doesn't really match who you are as a team. It doesn't really match your identity. But in this situation, maybe as a coach, you realize, okay, we have to play a certain way now in order to win this game that we didn't play before. And it might not be as heavy touch. It might not be as attacking. We might not be dedicating as many bodies forward and trying to overwhelm a team. Maybe we might sit back defensively or play a holding position or just try to be more conservative to try and take away the chances of us, leaving ourselves vulnerable on the back end. When transitioning from soccer to football, when I look at what happened on Saturday, I just don't think, maybe it was arrogance, maybe it was something else, maybe it was those expectations of, hey, we're not supposed to just come out here and like barely win this game. We're supposed to come out here and dominate this game because we are the number one seed. We're at home. We're all these things. And so that was the problem to me, was you have a strategy that's working. I'm going to tell you this, time of possession, I know it can be critical in soccer too. If you're possessing the ball more, chances are you're going to have a better chance of winning the game. That is also very, very important in football. And we had three backs that were working inconsistently, and we were gashing them defensively, and they had one of the worst run defenses. And instead of doing that and sitting on the ball and essentially holding on to it for twice as long as we needed to in order to not give it back to that kid named Jaden Daniels, we didn't do that. We tried to win the way that we've won all year, which is flash, which is run, which is gun, which is trick plays, which is all these other things. So that's why when I circled back to my frustration about the preparation for that game, I felt like we stuck with who we were despite the personnel that we had available to us. Because what's the most dangerous thing when you're playing with a defensive group that has more injuries than some teams do, starting on the field? 16? So that's almost like a side of the field and a half. What exactly are you supposed to do in that situation? Keep the ball away from Jaden Daniels. Keep the ball. What's the worst thing you can do? Go 3 and out. Right. And it feels like not only the turnovers, but they just weren't as efficient on the offensive end. So I just felt like there was a little bit of arrogance. And this is where expectations is bad, because when you let expectations form the way you go about doing your business, if you let that juice kind of get to your head a little bit, that's where it can get problematic. And that's when I say, when I watched that game on Saturday, it just felt like we weren't prepared to play the game we needed to play just to win, because it's just survive and advance at that point, right? If you get into a shootout with Buffalo and you end up losing, okay, fine, whatever. Season's not over. We still got a lot of season left. If you're in the divisional round of the playoffs, or if you're a soccer team in the semifinals or the state finals or wherever else, you got to do what is absolutely necessary in that moment to make sure you have more points at the end of the day than the other team does. And to me, I just think there was, and again, I can't prove this, nor do I want to believe this, I just think there was an air of arrogance. I think there was a touch of, this is how we win games, where we get flashy, we beat teams down, right? But the defense was out on the field for way too long, and that's how they got exposed. So I just, that's the most frustrating part in my mind. I still think that was a winnable game. And I think people saying that, well, it wasn't winnable, injury issues, all this stuff, we weren't going to win it, I think that's a coping mechanism. And I've seen that before, and I've seen it from fans of teams that have lost in big games. And I think it's a pretty lame coping mechanism, to be completely honest with you. But I know that we're used to this because of being Lions people and supporting a franchise. And we're not the only team. There are teams out there who have had expectations and have not met expectations. I mean, you talked about Buffalo. What was it? 5 straight years they went to the Super Bowl, didn't end up winning one. So it's like, I'm pretty sure the expectation was they were going to at least win one of them. So clearly they let the expectations down. But that was the other thing. I just felt like there was an air of, this is how we do things, and we weren't willing to adjust in the biggest moment when we absolutely needed to. So that's the scariest thing for me. The expectations part to me isn't bad, but when you let that fuel the way that you carry yourself going into a game, I know Dan Campbell took it on his shoulders, said it was his fault. Again, I don't believe that's completely true, but part of me thinks, again, there might be a little bit of that there. And I think we kind of understand now that, in that situation, we should have played it a whole lot differently than what we did. So I'm going to, expectations, again, it's a tricky thing, and it's something that you need to be able to manage. But if it leads to something like what we saw on Saturday, that's where it becomes problematic. But again, the expectation going into next year is, hey, we're going to win, and we're going to be right back at it.
So Peter Mazuik put in there, Team USA did win over Venezuela this past weekend, 3-1. The game,
good news,
on Saturday evening, and so they did in fact win that game. And as we dive into this, let's just talk about this for a second. That game, Jack McGlynn in the 37th, Patrick Agmang in the 39th minute, and Matko Majevic? I think it's Majevic in the 64th. Here's the thing, and we're going to wrap this up. One is we've got a slate of games here today on the NSN. So we've got some games in Mesa, Arizona here coming up here at 10:45 and 11 a.m. For our first two games here of the morning. It is the Nationals League E64 National Quarterfinals will take place here this morning on our platform. And we'll have those available on YouTube as well as on Roku. And, something that I wanted to say, and again, Nathan, I don't disagree with anything that you're saying. I think that there's probably 1,000 things that probably led to, what happened on Saturday, right? Maybe it's more like 100, there could, all of that. I don't think for 1 second that the team didn't come out prepared. I don't believe that's a thing. And the reason why is because that just doesn't seem like a Dan Campbell-esque type thing. Now, do I think that, and for someone that played at a high level and watched players at a high level, I can tell you that there is something to be said about hyping yourself up so much that you come out flat and coming out bad.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things to be said about that. As much as I like Jameson Williams, I feel like Jameson Williams is not a great team player for us. I feel like JMO is someone who is a really good player. But I don't know if he long-term fits into the mentality of the player you want in Detroit. And I'm not arguing that he doesn't have talent because he's got a lot of talent. But just the things that he does are just so different than the rest of the team. Okay. When he's just a different player in that regard. Everybody else, from my perspective of watching as a fan, feel like he's over here. So I don't feel like he is connected to the team, as maybe he, I don't know. We'll have to see. I know you're smiling about that. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
No, I just
tend to agree.
He's character-wise, they've had to work out a couple of things, and I'll agree with you on that.
Well, I don't know how much of a factor, because again, I'll tell you this right now: when you have a player in your locker room that is going against the grain, that can have a impact on the way your team performs, and. While, again, I said there might be 100 reasons or 1,000 reasons as to why things didn't shape up for the Lions on Saturday, I do think, again, I think that Jared Goff, and while we've seen quarterbacks in the past who are nobodies win Super Bowls, we've seen it. We've seen Nick Foles. When Tom Brady won the first Super Bowl, let's be honest. Lucky year. What's the difference between Nick Foles and Tom Brady in year one or going to the Super Bowl? Let's be honest here. I'm talking about year one. I'm not talking about year 12. In year one, what was the difference? Both players stepped up. Both players found a way to step up in the most difficult times. They had nothing to lose. What's the difference between Sam Darnold and Nick Foles? Nick Foles just found a way to make one more throw. Do what he just did, just get enough done to get them there, and then to win it, right? Right? The Philly special. No one's ever going to forget that, right? And what happened after that game? To be fair, he got a big-ass contract, and then he went nowhere. He legitimately went from to nothing. I expect the same thing to happen to Sam Darnold. Now, the argument could be made if Matt Stafford was in with our team, if Matt Stafford wasn't with LA right now, and it was actually our quarterback on Saturday, or this season for that matter, would Matt Stafford have taken us to a Super Bowl?
Let me probably, but who's to say? I will leave you with this. The Packers had 15 players on injured reserve when they won the Super Bowl. I don't know my what Roman numerals XLV Super Bowl. Oh boy, I think whatever their last one was. 15 players on injury reserve when they won that one as the 6th seed. Charles Woodson had a broken collarbone shortly before halftime of that Super Bowl game. By the way, Charles Woodson, in my mind, is the best two-way player in football history, already a Hall of Famer.
Yep, I agree with that.
I struggle with, again, the idea that it wasn't doable, even with the injuries there.
Oh, I agree with you too. I don't disagree. I think that again, it comes down. Here's the problem, and we have to go because I have games to get to. But here's the problem: is that when one is suffering so bad, you have to do more. So if the offense is at 100%, they got to be at 110% in order to pull it off. If your defense is only pulling 40% of their weight, you got to find a way to find the other 60%. It's going to come in the form of special teams, and it's going to come in the form of your offense. Every time. And that's what the hiccup between what happened to us in the Bills game here 3-4 weeks back is. It was a shootout, and one mistake, the Amon-Ra St. Brown fumble, is what cost us that game. Now on Saturday, it wasn't a fumble; it was 5 turnovers over the course of that game. If we just don't do that twice, we were going to score a touchdown. I argue we would score a touchdown that first fumble from Goff. I argue we get points there. And then I argue that in that fourth quarter, in the second quarter, going up into halftime when he throws a pick, that we get at least a field goal there if he doesn't force that ball. Okay? Again, argue on the bad throw. He didn't check down to his tight end in Laporta. Right? He checks down there. Okay? So we could sit there and say there are 3 moments in that game. If those 3 things did not happen, that game was completely different. Give them the other 2. Just take the other 2 and say, here you go. Pick 6. If someone tackles there, so there's moments in that game where you can say, yeah, you know what? If it weren't for 2 moments there, they would have been at least tied and maybe argue they could have been ahead. So, but we got to run. I got to go. But Nathan, man, as always, it's a pleasure talking with you here today on Inside the Game, our podcast. Episode number 11 is in the books. Don't forget to subscribe, like us, and share with your friends and family. Again, we're live every single day, Monday through Friday, right here on the National Soccer Network. For all of us at Inside the Game, I'm Jonathan Turner alongside Mr. Nathan Wangler. Don't forget, check us out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Make sure you rate us as well. But that we'll do a wrap here for number 11. We'll see you here tomorrow. Same time, same place, right here on Inside.